I'll go over brief real thoughts here for you guys. I really enjoyed the game a lot. I think, as I've always thought, QTEs are the laziest form of player engagement. Ooh. QTEs are the laziest form of player engagement, and they're just as lazy in this. They're just meant to be flashy while you're watching a cutscene go by to make sure you're still paying attention. I want to stress how bad the blade mode controls are. So you hold L2, you use the left stick to look around, you use the right stick to aim the blade, but then you have to press square or triangle to slice the blade, which means you have to take your hand off of the right stick to use square or triangle. And if you do that, if the thing moves at all and you try to press, then you fail. And that's what was happening repeatedly is I would go to move my hand and it would fuck up and I would die repeatedly because it's awful. The easy fix to that would be make right trigger the attack button in that mode. That way I keep one finger on left trigger, one finger on right trigger, and both thumbs on the sticks. I don't know why there needs to be two slicey modes when you control the direction of the slice already, so whatever. And that's the only fight outside of the Sundowner fight where you actually have to utilize that mechanic, so it's weird that they bothered with it. It was awful. But other than that, the gameplay is fine. Dodge is very strange because if you use square X and left stick, that is an attack, but if you just use square and X, that is dodge. So you don't control what direction you dodge in, but as long as you dodge at the right time, you'll avoid damage, so it doesn't matter what direction you dodge in, which is weird because usually in games like this, it fucking matters what direction you dodge in. It was very strange. But like other than those gripes, I mean, the game was fun. I enjoyed it. The music is awesome. The story is complete bullshit, like off the walls nonsense. But that's what you get out of Metal Gear. Like, this is easily the weirdest Metal Gear. And it's not even a Kojima thing, but it perfectly captures that Kojima energy of like being way too overt in its themes. And yet people will still like ignore the very obvious themes as if they're not spelling it out word for word. Any questions, chat? How did people like this game? I liked this game.
Yeah, the thing that a lot of people probably don't understand just from a viewing standpoint is that this game is just like, it's very simple, but overall, like how over the top everything is. Even the QuickTime events, like I know you don't like QuickTime events, Will, but at least in this game, cool shit is happening related to the QuickTime events, whereas I feel like in a lot of games, QuickTime events are not always related to like things that are particularly super cool or interesting, whereas in this game at least like you feel like you're interacting with a cool movie that's going on, you know, like just like the shit where Raiden tears off the giant fucking sword arm from the Metal Gear Excelsius and then uses it as a giant sword. Like that is fucking sick, but it is a QuickTime event. So, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, not super engaging, but at least you're entertained.
The best QuickTime event of all time is in one of the Spider-Man games, and I can't remember which Spider-Man game it is. I think it's Spider-Man 3 tie-in game. If you fail a QuickTime event to save a woman from a bomb, Spider-Man pancakes on the floor, the woman screams, and everything explodes. It is the best QTE fail of all time.
There is a great case to be made about failing QuickTime events in Heavy Rain. If you've ever watched like a compilation of Heavy Rain QuickTime event fails,
it just pushes you through so you can't actually fail, and it looks so stupid.
Yeah, it is absolutely hilarious.
There are games nowadays that even, it's mostly Sony games, I think, that even have options to change QuickTime events to hold button presses if they're rapid tap and even skip them entirely. So when Austin was playing Spider-Man, there was this one QuickTime event related to like getting on top of a car and then like grabbing the guys out of it. And at some point he just gave up and turned the auto QTE thing on. And guess what? The gameplay doesn't change a fucking bit. It's just slightly less frustrating.
Well, and there's definitely an argument to be made that QTEs are like anti-accessible, you know? So I do like the idea of like having that as an option for games, but this game came out in 2013, so, you know.
Yeah, there were accessibility options. What are those?
Yeah.
This game doesn't even run at like a higher monitor resolution than 1080p.
Shout out to the music. soundtrack for this game is absolutely goated, 10 out of 10.
Do I enjoy Platinum games? I'm not sure I've played many Platinum games, actually. Like, I know enough about Platinum games that, like, of, like, what people generally think of them, but I haven't played, like, Bayonetta or Nier Automata. That's also Platinum, right? Devil May Cry is not a Platinum game. I've played Devil May Cry. That is not a Platinum game. Aren't every sequels worse than their first game? No, I think games, a lot of the time, the second game is usually the one that's, like, the best. There's a lot of cases for that. Gears 2 is widely regarded as the best in the series. Halo 2 is my favorite in the series.
Nier is a phenomenal example.
Yeah, Nier Automata. I don't think a lot of people even realize Nier Automata is a sequel to another game.
Dark Souls 2
Dark
is
Souls
clearly
2,
the best
no,
Dark Souls game.
Yeah, sometimes there are exceptions. I'm trying to think what other... Little Big Planet 2, definitely better than the first. Devil May Cry 2 is an atrocity. Yeah, okay, so there are exceptions. Best song. I really like the last song, but I don't really know the names of the songs. Like, all the boss fight songs are super good, but, like, Senator Armstrong's song is just associated with the memes, so it's the one I've heard the most. And it's, like, it hits pretty hard. The dialogue, yeah, so all right, he says he's not a fan of the dialogue. Number one, it's Japanese translation, so it doesn't translate all that great without them, because there's a point with localization where you have to either change the lyrics to something that they may not necessarily mean, which would be important for like keeping the theme of the game. So they try and localize it as best they can in a way that still makes sense, and it ends up with like very stinted dialogue, and that's a lot of because Japanese media is more inspired by kabuki theater, which is a lot more exaggerated. So if you know that it's sort of, I guess more in the case of like Japanese media is structured a lot like Western cartoons, it makes more sense that the dialogue is the way it is. It's still ridiculous, don't get me wrong. It's super just nonsense most of the time, and it is barely coherent in a way that like no human would ever speak this way, but it's done enough that you know what's going on most of the time. The Metal Gear Solid games are the same way.
I have to think that the voice actors and the people reviewing like the script translation had to understand that there was like probably some element of like the message that they wanted to get across here, but I have to think that the way that they took it was just like so over the top that it's almost parody of like the actual original message of what the game is trying to get across because of how over the top it is.
I mean, I think that's Metal Gear in general, is they have this message that is always so obvious, and I'm not even sure if Revengeance did it as like parodying Metal Gear Solid in the fact that it was even more overt and ridiculous, or if it was just it's a Platinum game and that's just kind of how they are thematically a lot of the time.
I think they kind of took the Metal Gear formula as far as story goes, and they just went the Bayonetta direction with it. Is definitely not a bad thing. Like Bayonetta is very much like over the top, kind of ridiculous. It doesn't really have serious thematic messages like Metal Gear does, but it is very over the top and ridiculous in that style.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that the ridiculously overt writing sort of the message doesn't hit as hard because it almost seems like it's a parody, so it's hard to take it seriously. But like the game does have like serious themes to it, like child soldiers, themes of anti-war, anti-capitalism, that kind of thing. It's just so ridiculous that you could be forgiven if people think that they're not actually serious about this kind of thing.
I personally love like how almost I guess you could almost call it ham-fisted it is about like instead of having just fucked up shit and letting you draw your own opinion, they literally shove it down your throat so hard.
Yeah, they shove it down your throat and then also explain it to you to make sure that you know exactly what's going on. It's not enough to have the things happen and like show it in a way that you know it's fucked up. They have to explain to you beat for beat why it's messed up, which is part of what makes the message like not hit as hard. It almost reminds me of if they wanted to make it in a way that was better, it would have to be written like Starship Troopers, where Starship Troopers also has like very overt themes, but because they don't literally tell you what the themes are, when Starship Troopers first came out, people didn't understand that it was satire and thought it was just an awful movie, when now it's regarded as like one of the best satirical movies of all time.
Someone in chat asked how you play this game. It's because I paid for Will to play this game, and we can now plug his Patreon because we had an organic segue.
Yeah, I have tiers on my Patreon for people to play to force me to play a game. So there's a couple games on the list. This was one of them, and I decided to do this next. Pay to play. How does it feel that this is the last game chronologically in the Metal Gear Solid universe? Yeah, I guess it is. That's kind of odd. This game sucks? No, I don't think this game sucks at all. I think there are parts of it that I didn't enjoy, like the controls for certain bits, but overall, I enjoyed the hell out of this game.
Any of the monkey fun time sections.
Oh my god, the monkeys are the worst. Those were easily that. The monkeys were bad, the little robots with hands were bad, and the level leading up to the Sundowner fight fucking sucked. Every enemy was just a bullet sponge, and it was awful. Just awful.
I'm going to be saving up to get Will to play Metro next. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, Metro's on the list. It's not on like must play, but it's on the list of like I might play.
Yeah, I think Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light are like really fun games in terms of like story. They're pretty bad, but I think that overall like the actual gameplay elements are pretty fun. Unless you're using the bastard gun.
Do I prefer Japanese games or American games? I'm not sure there's like a either or for me. Like I like so many different games. And I like a lot of Japanese games. I mean, Kingdom Hearts 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. And I like Japanese action games. I really like Devil May Cry 5, the Kingdom Hearts I said. I liked this a lot. I'd probably like Bayonetta if I played that. I'd probably like Nier as well. The thing is, though, the presentation in how Western and Japanese games are very different. So Japanese games tend to be a lot more ridiculous with their story and upfront, but they also tend to be, with this accepting a little bit, because there was a lot of points in this game where it would stop me to like spew story while I was just stuck in place. But with Japanese games, they'll tend to have moments of like really long exposition dumps, but then also really long stretches of gameplay, where Western games will tend to try and weave the story into the games, and they'll be a little less engaging because a lot of the story just ends up being told to you while you're pressing like one button. Like Uncharted 4 had that problem where there was large sections of the game where you're just like walking around listening to characters talk when you're like young Nate. I know God of War had a lot of that where you're just expected to like sit and listen to story while you're basically doing nothing. So it just depends. I also really loved Elden Ring. That's a Japanese game, and I like the Souls games fine. I don't think I like them that much, but I like Elden Ring a lot.
I think that making a distinction between like Western and more like, I guess, Eastern or originating video games is fine. Like sometimes I think that there's a pretty easy line to draw there, but I think also like people forget that Nintendo is a Japanese company, but a lot of like Nintendo's mainline games people don't really associate with like the traditional Eastern video game formula. Like a lot of the time when people think about Japanese games, they think about RPGs like Persona or like turn-based RPGs like Final Fantasy, but Zelda is a Japanese franchise. Mario is a Japanese franchise.
That's true. I think Nintendo in general definitely has a very Western style to their game design. It may even be the other way around, that like Nintendo like set the standards for the genre and then Western companies like sort of copied it, where that other Japanese companies didn't necessarily.
Yeah, I definitely think that, Nintendo was one of the huge pioneers of the video games industry, and I think a lot of Western video game design stems from like nostalgia surrounding the original Nintendo games. We have a whole genre of video games called Metroidvanias, which is literally centered around the original concept of Metroid.
And yeah, in Castlevania. Those are games I like a lot. I like Metroidvania style games because of, and I've talked about this before, but I hate player-driven unlock trees, which plague the hell out of games nowadays, because I think that when you set the expectation that the player is the one unlocking things. You run across the problem that if a player has something too early, the game is too easy, or if the player doesn't unlock something on time, the game ends up too difficult, and you also have to develop the game around the fact that the player may not choose to have abilities. So the game needs to be able to be beaten without including those abilities as part of the game design. And so one of the reasons Metroidvania works better than a player-driven unlock tree is you show the player that they can go somewhere eventually, and then they come back with a new ability that they gained somewhere else, and now you know you can go that direction. So you have a sense of progression that you don't get through a player-driven unlock tree. Now, you can have an unlock tree that gets to points where you have to get an ability to move on to an area, but that also comes in with the caveat that if you grind too early, you can get to areas really quickly and may potentially skip other areas. So just having abilities locked behind the progression of the story fits more naturally. Is there any specific genre I prefer? I don't know. I mean, I like a lot of different genres, and I like a lot of different games in genres. I would say I probably play a lot of first-person shooters or third-person shooters the most, but in terms of if I will like a game, I like casual games a lot. I like a game with a good customization for characters. So Little Big Planet, I loved customizing my character in that. I like The Sims. I like XCOM, especially. Yeah, there's plenty of mods for XCOM that I spend hours customizing soldiers that I will then lose in one mission. Yeah, I like good sandbox games as well. Just throwing me into a game and letting me play how I want to is the sort of thing I enjoy. And then because this was the end of a 5-hour stream, we sort of forgot to have a decent wrap up. So this is just kind of where it trails off. I said this at the beginning of the Rail Thoughts, but I thoroughly enjoyed Metal Gear Rising outside of the few frustrations, and I highly recommend playing it if you've never played it before. It's definitely one of those games I would say that everyone should play at least once, just to have the experience.